Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Susanna Doyle, and I am the Alumni Relations Manager at Trinity Development and Alumni. You're all very welcome to this week's Inspiring Ideas at Trinity webinar. We are delighted to welcome Professor Ian Robertson, who is going to be talking about not just the need to maintain our mental health, especially during the COVID crisis, but we'll also share some simple techniques for how we can do that. And we're also excited to have Dr. David McGrath with us as well, who is going to be helping to facilitate the Q&A today. If you are watching on Zoom, to adjust your audio settings, you can do that on the bottom left of your screen. To go in or out of the full screen mode, you can click on the button on the top right of your screen. If you need to leave the webinar at any time, you can click the button on the bottom right of your screen. And if you'd like to ask any questions, please do so. We really welcome them. And you can do that by clicking on the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. And after the presentation, the speakers will do their best to get through those questions. If you are watching on Facebook Live, you can mute and unmute your video. In addition, if you have questions you'd like to ask, please use the comment feature. We will be recording the webinar today. If you're watching on Zoom, you'll get an automatic recording tomorrow. If you are watching today on Facebook Live, you can go to our YouTube page to find the recording. Today, Ian is going to be giving a presentation for about 30 to 35 minutes. Afterwards, we'll open up to Q&A with David and Ian, and we plan to finish up at 2 o'clock today. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. David McGrath, who is a GP who has specialized in student health for the past 24 years, initially at Edinburgh University, where he was head of department, and since 2006 as the medical director of the College of Health Service at Trinity. His particular interests include student mental health, addictions in young people, and the delivery of tobacco-free campuses. He is the former president of the Irish Student Health Association and is a member of the Healthy Trinity community. So now let me hand it over to David.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us at the lunchtime webinar. As Suzanne has said, I'm David McGrath. I'm the Medical Director of the College Health Service here at Trinity. Our clinical team of general practitioners, nurses, the college psychiatrist, and the college physiotherapist have continued to consult with our patients, who are the staff and the students of the college, since the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis. Like all of us watching here today, our patients have been faced with an extraordinary set of circumstances over the past 3 to 4 months. We can hear this in our consultations with them. Most of our consultations have been on the telephone, but every aspect of their lives has been affected, from physical illness, stresses related to family bereavements, to work and study, relationships, family dynamics, financial pressures, and people's new housing arrangements, be it cocooning or self-isolation. This has come across very clearly to us in these consultations, and the ratio of stress-related or indeed mental health-related consultations has significantly increased during the COVID-19 outbreak. We have been trying to assist our patients with regard to this, and I'm absolutely delighted that we have Ian today coming on board to make some recommendations as to how we will manage stress in these circumstances. I know that we will enjoy Ian's talk. Ian has been a wonderful supporter of College Health. In his keynote College Health Week lectures, he has introduced us to many interesting concepts. I particularly remember the changeling fish and the winning mind from his book, The Winner Effect. His new book, The Stress Test, will no doubt bring forward many new practical ideas and tips that will help us to navigate the stresses created by the unprecedented challenges that we are facing and dealing with at present. Following Ian's talk, we will have a question and answer session, so we would be delighted if you would submit your questions. So I'm delighted to introduce Ian now.
Thank you very much indeed, David, for that kind introduction. And thank you all for all different parts of the world coming in today. I'm going to spend 30 minutes and I'm going to try and give you some very, very practical tips you will go away with that will actually make you better able to cope with the challenges that this unusual, this unprecedented situation are throwing up for everyone. We are masters of our own brains if we only believe it. So let me just outline the learning objectives today. I want you to go away understanding how and why you have considerable control over your own brain. I want to make sure you have some very, very practical techniques that you can use immediately today. And very importantly, I want you to understand that actually stress is a form of energy that we can harness if we approach it in the right way. So that's the learning objectives. I'm going to start off with an exercise. What I'd like you to do, and I'm going to do it as well, because it's always a great thing to do, just close your eyes, and I want you to take in a long, slow breath to the count of 5 and out to the count of 6. Doesn't have to be too deep a breath, and do your own count, okay? So let's do that now. Now do that again. Just take in a long, slow breath to the count of 5 and out to the count of 6. One final time. Breathe in to the count of 5. And out to the count of 6. Now, if we were all in a room together, I'd ask you to put up your hand if you felt a bit different after doing that compared to before. And most of you would put up your hand. So I'm going to assume that most of you felt a little bit different. And that different feeling is because of this part of the brain here called the locus coeruleus. This is an MRI scan from the Institute of Neuroscience in Trinity. And the locus coeruleus is this tiny sliver of tissue in the midbrain, which is the only source of an incredible natural chemical in your brain called noradrenaline, or it fires off noradrenaline. The locus coeruleus fires off noradrenaline whenever basically anything interesting, challenging, stressful, emotionally arousing happens. It's a general purpose, wake up, pay attention, neurotransmitter in your brain has remarkable properties. And the remarkable thing about the locus coeruleus is that it's chemosensitive. What I mean by that is it precisely changes moment to moment its rate of firing according to how much carbon dioxide is in your blood. And as you breathe, normally your carbon dioxide levels fluctuate in your blood, and that changes moment to moment the attention of your brain because of changes in noradrenaline in your brain. And when you breathe in the way you just did there, you alter the level of noradrenaline in your brain, usually reducing it a bit, depending on your level of arousal. And this is probably the most precise pill you'll ever take in your lives, or can take, to alter your brain chemistry, is to use your breathing. So my first tip of today is to use your breath to change your brain. And I'm going to explain how you do this, not just once, not just today, but use this as a habit that you get into many, many times in a day. Now, this is Tiger Woods, the great golfer. The day I'm not nervous is the day I quit. That's the greatest thing about it, just to feel that rush. Now, that's a strange statement. This guy likes feeling nervous. Well, actually, he needs to feel nervous. He needs to feel nervous to get his brain to function at the optimal level to play the amazing golf that he's capable of. How does that happen? Well, let's just think. A couple of years ago, I was sitting at home and my heart started to race. My skin was really sweaty. My mouth was dry and my stomach was churning. Stress and anxiety always gets me in my stomach first, and I was very tense. Now, if you were in the audience here, I'd ask, what emotion do you think I was having? And someone would shout out, anxiety. And I would say, no. Scotland had just beaten England at rugby, an unusual event. So here, I was excited. So here's a strange conundrum. How is it that exactly the same symptoms in your body that are symptoms of one emotion, stress or anxiety, can be identical to those of another emotion, excitement, or indeed anger? Well, the reason is that these are all symptoms. All of these symptoms are symptoms of the activation of the autonomic nervous system and associated higher level brain systems. And they're all symptoms of anxiety, of excitement, of anger. And in fact, they're all symptoms of a general arousal. So what these symptoms are your body preparing for action. And your body and large parts of your brain don't care what kind of action it is. This is a general emergency alert. Okay, you have to do something. If you're anxious, it means you have to run away or avoid. If you're excited, it means you jump up and down and celebrate and hug people. If you're angry, you punch people or fight them. So the specifics of the emotion aren't important. This is the, if you like, the fuel that underpins a general purpose action system that's common to a whole lot of emotions. So I'm going to give you the second exercise of the day, and I'm going to pull this all together for you. So again, if you were in the room, I would ask you a question. I'd say, how many of you can anticipate being in a stressful situation sometime in the next 2 weeks? I'd ask you to put up your hands, and in my experience, everyone puts up their hands, including me. So now what I'd like you to do is to get that stressful situation into your mind now. I want you to take a couple of minutes to do that, to imagine yourself into that situation. And I want you to stick with that situation because I'll be coming back to it a few times over the rest of this talk. So close your eyes now and imagine yourself just about to go into that situation. It might be a difficult conversation with a friend or relative or flatmate. It might be going to see a doctor about a difficult diagnosis. It might be your boss calling you in for a difficult conversation. Whatever the stressful situation is, I want you to imagine yourself just about to go into it. And close your eyes until you can get some of the symptoms. Just try and create in your body what you're first starting off with the most common symptom that you experience with stress. For me, I can feel the slight twisting in my stomach, maybe your dry mouth, maybe your muscles getting tense, your heart's probably beating a bit faster as you think of that situation. Okay, so I want you to imagine yourself in that situation, and I want to now talk to you about what's happening in your brain and your body. Now, I mentioned noradrenaline, this strange chemical messenger that changes with your breathing and which you can control using your breath. Well, noradrenaline is like many of the brain's chemical messengers. It has an upside down U-shaped function like this. So that with too little of the stuff, your brain underperforms. So we have performance up the left and we have arousal along the right, okay? For arousal here, let's talk about levels of noradrenaline. So if you wake up at 4 in the morning to get an early flight, or if you're really jaded or bored being at home in COVID, then your brain will generate too little noradrenaline for it to function in a really good way. Because the brain needs noradrenaline for the different regions of the brain to communicate with each other, to vibrate in phase at about 40 cycles per second. That's how they transmit information. If you don't have enough noradrenaline, then you're groggy the way you are at 4 in the morning, or the way you are if you're really bored. And of course, too much of the stuff, and the opposite, you also get impairment of brain function. Because there's a sweet spot in the middle of optimal noradrenaline function where your brain performs best. And when you're in that sweet spot, you can think more clearly, you can solve problems better, you can see the wood for the trees better, you can avoid misinterpreting someone's comment or behavior in a way that maybe you wouldn't if you were thinking more clearly. So being in the sweet spot is really important for, if you like, navigating the stressful time. So here's my second tip for you. And this really, really, really strongly recommend that you put some mental energy into implementing this tip. So every time you change task during the day, moving from your email to making a call, leaving the table after lunch to going and writing something, or even in the evening, standing up from the television to go to the toilet. Take 20 seconds, just 20 seconds, to change your brain chemistry using your breath in the way that we practice there. The reason I say do this so often is because this is a constant little mini reset of your brain. It allows you to maintain a more mindful, less habit-driven, and then I'm including in that mental habits that are associated with anxiety. It allows you to refresh your brain function and get to that sweet spot many times a day. And the reason to do it so often, apart from the fact that it resets your brain, is when you're next in your stressful situation, in a really stressful situation, that's the time you will need that habit to be at your fingertips. Because if you haven't learned it as a habit, you'll forget to do it and you won't do it. And you'll do what many people do in stressful situations. You'll hold your breath or you'll breathe faster. And when you hold your breath and you breathe faster, you change the carbon dioxide levels in your blood. You push up the noradrenaline levels. You push yourself over to the far side of that curve where you're anxious, you're panicking, you're not thinking clearly, you're getting things out of proportion, you're assuming the worst, and you're not in the sweet spot. In the opposite, you're in a situation where you're making things worse because your brain is not functioning properly because there's too much noradrenaline. And it's so simple. You can reset that with this breathing exercise, but you have to remember to do it, which we don't have the working memory capacity to do when we're preoccupied with the stress we're in. So that's why you want to build it up as a habit. It will do you good anyway during the day, but it will do you double the good if you're finally when you come to that stressful situation. So we'll come back to that in a moment. I want to talk now about this alchemy that Tiger Woods had, how you change stress into challenge, because that's what he did. He was excited about being nervous. He's going to quit golf if he can't. He loves that rush. So I'm going to give you an example of that, of how I did that in my own life. Many years ago, I had a very tricky HR kind of issue with someone that was working for me. And this person could really push my buttons and would often in meetings would provoke me. And I'm not proud. Sometimes I would behave kind of, I'm a bad-tempered Scotsman. Sometimes I'd behave in a non-calm way in response to this. So, and this situation wasn't going anywhere good. So the external reality, and I had a meeting coming up. That was my stressful situation, this meeting I had to have. And I knew that objectively it couldn't go anywhere in the external world. So there wasn't going to be any resolution of this because of the nature of the problem. So I suddenly had an insight. I changed this difficult, stressful situation I was in. I changed the goal of it. And I changed it to an internal goal. And I said, my goal in this meeting is not to get an outcome that's going to be I want in the external world. My goal is to behave calmly in the face of provocation. That's my internal goal, is to have this calm, professional, measured, unlike me, response in this difficult situation to someone who knew how to push my buttons. And so I prepared for this mentally. I did my breathing big time. I followed my own tips. I mentally imagined myself in that situation. I mentally imagined the comments that I could anticipate or the buttons being pushed. And I imagined myself feeling these arousal symptoms, because a combination of anxiety, anger, because the body doesn't know which is which. I could feel them rise, and I used my breath to quell them. So I practiced this in advance. So I went into this meeting with a new goal, and the goal was to comport myself calmly in the face of provocation. And I did it, and I felt amazing afterwards. I felt so good. I felt as if I had solved some major scientific problem. And that was an example of, by engineering the goal, contriving a success experience and using my ability to mentally carry out alchemy on emotions, because that's what Tiger Woods did. He did a mental alchemy. He changed one emotion, anxiety, into another one, excitement. He called it a rush. So here's my next tip for you. I want you to reimagine the stressful situation, to try and reimagine it, re-engineer it in your brain as a stress, as a challenge, rather than as a threat, okay? Try and, often that involves changing an external goal into an internal one, okay? But it needn't be. It can be seeing an external goal as an external challenge as well. So whatever your stressful situation is, try and do that. Try and learn to do that. And this is an example of harnessing stress. So that's my third exercise for you now. I want you to close your eyes. I want you to imagine that stressful situation. And I want you to do what I did, or try and do. I had longer time to do than you have. So I want to just have a go at it now. Usually about 20-30% of people in this workshop face-to-face manage to do a little bit of it. It's not easy to do in a couple of minutes, and we only have a couple of minutes here. So I'm going to just stop talking for about a minute to see if you can do this alchemy, to see this as a threat, as a challenge rather than a threat. Okay. Again, I'll be interested to know if anyone, how many of you, some of you will, could do that. But just practice that. Practice that. I cannot overemphasize that. Combined with the breathing is going to change your life if you really manage to implement it. So here's why. Here's why. So there's the upside down U-shaped function that we're talking about. When you're in a threat mindset, the fact that you're anticipating punishment, anticipating bad things, creates a vicious cycle of worry. Your whole memory system is changed so that you remember past failures, past difficult times, past stressful times. That makes you more anxious. The more anxious you are, the more likely you are to remember these things. Also, your attention system is biased. So if I'm talking to a big audience, if I'm in the threat mindset, and I have been several times, suddenly your attention can only focus on the guy in the front row who's frowning and shaking his head, okay? There may be 1,000 smiling, interested faces, but when you're in the threat mindset, not only does it bias your memory system, it biases your attention system. So you start looking for evidence to confirm your fear that the bad things are happening. So you selectively attend to the one person in the audience or the two people who are not enjoying what you're saying. And that makes you think about what this does. It makes you self-aware. So you start thinking about what you're saying and you start to doubt it, and each word becomes like a brick falling from your mouth. Okay, and that then can escalate into panic and speaking phobia. If you can do the stress to challenge alchemy, the threat to challenge alchemy that we just tried in the previous exercise, if you do that, you break that vicious cycle. And suddenly, rather than fearing punishment, you're anticipating success, like me anticipating behaving calmly in that situation. And that then automatically pulls your noradrenaline levels back nearer the sweet spot. And when it does that, your brain performs better. You think more clearly, you remember better, you speak more slowly, more clearly. And that is self-reinforcing. It's a positive cycle. So this is incredibly effective if you can just learn to do it. And it's so much better if you do it offline before you're in a really stressful situation, because then the habits are formed that you can then do it online. Okay, so what's happening here? This is a fundamental way the humans and all mammals work. We work because we're in conflict between two basic forces. One is going forward and anticipating of reward, and the other is retreating in the face of punishment. And there's a whole set of psychological and behavioral processes associated with each of these. And they are actually implemented, crudely speaking, in the two halves of the brain. The two halves of the brain are trying to inhibit each other all the time. So the going forward, let's call it the approach system, you're eagerly anticipating reward. You've got goals in mind and you're very narrowly focused on them. You're optimistic, you're confident. That primes positive memories in your mind, which helps you feel more positive. And that's the psychology of the bull market. That's the psychology of 2005 or 2006. The avoidance mindset system, you're anticipating punishment. You're wanting to avoid. You're filled with fear and with doubt. Your negative memories are primed and you're lacking confidence and you're pessimistic. That's the bear market. That's 2009, 10. Now, because the two halves of the brain are in competition with each other, if one of these systems becomes dominant, that dominance increases and you get this mutual inhibition. So once you start to be in a state of avoidance and fear of being predominantly thinking of bad things happening, you might be, for instance, during the COVID crisis, worried about your family, worried about your job, worried about the finances. That system can become dominant and it can squish and inhibit the left hemisphere system, which is more to do with anticipating rewards. And that can become people who are suffering from severe anxiety, that can become really dominant. The opposite can happen in things like compulsive gambling, compulsive sex addiction, compulsive drinking, that people become dominated by the reward anticipation system, okay? And that inhibits the right hemisphere avoidance system. And healthy life needs a balance between these two systems because there are good and bad associated with both of these. So for instance, The right frontal lobe, empathy, self-awareness, okay, self-monitoring, your assessment of risk. We need these things in life. So we need a balance between these two. But when you're in a threat mindset, when the opposite of woods is, this right hemisphere system is dominating, and it makes it harder to think of reward, harder to think of goals. You end up retreating. And chronically anxious people, in general, do less stuff. They avoid. The repertoire of behavior is limited, which means they have less opportunity to experience chance encounters, rewards, the things that happen if you're out and about. And similarly, people who are compulsive gamblers or compulsive addicts to money and power, the opposite happens, and they become totally consumed with their own narrow goals, greedily preoccupied, selfish, narcissistic, lacking self-awareness, lacking empathy. So we need, by changing from a threat mindset to a challenge mindset, and also by using your breathing, what you're doing is you're giving the dominant right hemisphere stress system, you're reducing its dominance and giving the left hemisphere reward-oriented, optimistic, goal-oriented system a chance to flourish. So that's really what's happening in your brain when you do the alchemy of threat to challenge. Okay, so harness the energy of arousal by saying to yourself, I feel excited when you're thinking about that stressful situation that you're facing. Okay, go into that looking for an opportunity to perform and say to yourself out loud before you do, I feel excited. Now, nearly finished. Lobster grow, but their shells are fixed. How does that happen? Well, the only reason a lobster can grow is it grows inside and the soft flesh rubs against the hard, sharp interior of the shell and it becomes stressful. So eventually the lobster has to crawl under a stone and painfully squeeze out of the shell and wait there vulnerable and soft until a new shell, bigger one, grows. And they do that 7 or 8 times in a lifetime. I think that's quite a good metaphor for how we can cope with the kind of adversity we have now. And it turns out there's a sweet spot for adversity as well. People who have too sheltered a life as they grow up, who never experience any adversity, end up more emotionally vulnerable than people who have too much, so people who have moderate levels of adversity. Too much adversity is just as bad. So if we embrace tough times, challenge, redundancy, family conflict, if we embrace them with a challenge mindset and realize that we shouldn't be frightened of feeling anxious. The feeling anxious is a healthy emotional response to an uncertain situation. But try and harness that, we will actually benefit, not just tolerate adversity, we can benefit from it because it is a form, can be properly approached, a form of inoculation or vaccination, an emotional vaccination. So I want you to think yourself of examples of people who have grown out of adversity. Nietzsche said, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. That is true only within limits. It's true within limits. Moderate degrees of adversity, if we approach them properly, can make us emotionally stronger. So here's my tip. Consider moderate stress as a form of vaccination and as a source of resilience. Try and listen to Tiger Woods and see it as that rush. And finally, I just say, when you're setting goals for yourself, there's a sweet spot for goals as well. And goals are not just about what you're doing next week or next year. Goals are what you're doing for the next 10 minutes or the next hour. Successful people set moderately challenging goals for themselves all the time, okay? And the secret here is, if you achieve a goal, like when I behaved well in that difficult situation, your brain secretes another chemical messenger called dopamine in the reward network. That secretion, that's a natural antidepressant and a natural anti-anxiety drug. So by structuring your life and creating goals for yourself that you then achieve, and that goal could be walking 100 yards down the road, depending on your situation. If you set clear goals for yourself and achieve them, you will give yourself multiple mini boosts of a naturally occurring antidepressant. So, however, achieving successes, however small, release natural antidepressants and anti-anxiety chemicals in the brain. So my final tip for you, contrive small successes multiple times in a day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Ian. That was most enjoyable. Can you hear me, Ian?
I can hear you. Thank you.
All right. So, Ian, we've had many questions in as your talk went along, and in trying to decide which question to put to you in such a short period of time, I've just tried to distill some of the questions into themes, really. But I thought I'd ask you a really simple question to start off or not. To start off with, really a yes or no type question, which might kick us off easily. Emer was wondering, did Ian solve the problem with the colleague just by being calm?
No, the relationship never recovered, and that person left. Yeah.
But that was the way you were able to manage the situation.
That was the way. That's right. So the critical thing, David, is to when we're worrying about what we do in the world and what's going to happen, we have to distinguish in our own mind between things we can control and things we cannot control, and not stress about things we cannot control. And I couldn't control. My judgment was I couldn't control that situation. So I changed my sense of control to my internal state.
Absolutely. And building on that, and really on the threat versus challenge mindset that you were speaking about, Colette was wondering, and I suppose this brings me back into the kind of automatic negative thinking, and she was wondering, if you are locked into seeing challenges as a threat, what can you do to change this?
So that's you. So if you're really feel you're kind of trapped in a threat mindset, okay, that's a really important question. First of all, it's very important that your theory about yourself, that you scrutinize that theory. Some people have a theory about themselves that the great psychologist Carol Dweck calls a fixed mindset. My mother was stressed. My mother was a very anxious person, or I'm just an anxious person. That is a fixed theory about yourself. And implicit in that theory is, really, there's nothing I can do about it. If you don't believe there's anything you can do about it, then you won't engage in the painful process of learning new habits. And that's what changing your emotions and controlling your anxiety involves, is learning new habits. Now, we know that I'm learning the piano just now. And some days I think I've got no learning capacity at all. Other days I feel I've done well. It's an up and down. If I didn't believe that I had learning capacity, I'd have given it up by now. And the same is true of the emotion. So you have to, first of all, believe that you can gradually gain control of that threat, of that mindset. And I assure you, you can, as long as you believe that change is possible. And the brain, the human brain, is enormously plastic. It's changed physically by experience. And if you just set small goals for yourself, very small goals for yourself, that are just within the limits of what you feel you can do, that stretch you a bit, you will gradually be able to change to a more challenged mindset.
And probably if we just moderate our expectations very slightly in terms of what we can achieve in each incremental move forward, it will be more straightforward for us. And we also need perseverance in trying to adapt like this.
Absolutely, David. And one of the great enemies of that is perfectionism. People that set themselves too high a goal all the time so that everything feels like a failure against that. So we have to become skilled and realize that we're all imperfect. None of us are going to be, very few of us are going to become Tiger Woods. So we have to set goals that are our own goals and within our own limits of our capacity.
And Ian, Tom was wondering, it was really around meditation, and Yvonne then subsequently also asked us about mindfulness. So Tom was wondering how often, and are there any particular benefits in attending group sessions rather than individual sessions for meditation? And Yvonne was wondering, would you recommend mindfulness or stress reduction practices?
I absolutely would recommend mindfulness. It's not everyone likes it. And there are many different ways. I personally use an app on the phone called Buddhify, which has got about 500 different little mindfulness sessions for all sorts of different situations, but there are lots of others. And sometimes people find it better to do it in groups. Of course, that's not really possible now. So I would utterly recommend. The evidence on the effects on the immune system, the effects on the brain, the effects on psychological states are incredibly strong. And but there are many other routes. Some people, they find it in music. Some people find it in singing. Some people find it in yoga. So there's not just one route. And we can all learn to control our emotions. We just have to look and find the right way for us.
And another theme that's really coming through is really dealing with younger children, or maybe dealing with trying to assist people who have ADD or other attention disorders. How should they deal with the stress of lockdown? And also there were some questions, two people asked about breathing exercises with children.
Oh yeah.
Whether they're helpful.
Yeah, the answer is, I'll tell you one. First of all, what a technique that really works with a lot of children, they really get it, is if they're feeling anxious, if you tell them to say to themselves, "I feel excited," a lot of kids really get that. They really like it. It's a very simple thing for them to do. The breathing.
So that would really bring in the threat challenge. That's a real direct way of managing the threat challenge.
Very, very simple. And there's good, I could quote the studies that support this, but I just know from lots of people telling me, their kids have been doing exams, or even younger kids, for them to, the kind of curiosity they have to say, hold on a minute, yeah, these are the same symptoms I have when I'm excited. Yeah, I'm excited. It's really important. The breathing, I to know whether children are not that good at kind of internally doing stuff, although there are mindfulness courses going on with children in schools, and I think they're brilliant. So I try out the breathing. We try it out with them. Coping with very active young kids in home, that's tough. That's tough. So you have to set goals for yourself. So you have to, for example, just say, well, look, at the end of this 50-minute interaction I'm having, trying to do some lessons with these children, I'm going to sit down and have a cup of tea in the garden or on my own in the bedroom. I'm going to reward myself. So I'm going to chunk up the day into manageable chunks, and that's a goal. My goal is I'm going to be patient, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it for a fixed length of time. I'll know when I've achieved that goal, and I'm going to feel good about it. I'm going to reward myself. That's a way of trying to corral these, otherwise that experience that can go on indefinitely.
Yeah, and another issue that's come up really is for teachers. Sandra asked us really about vicarious trauma and how we would try and assist people with that. I mean, my understanding about vicarious trauma is it's the emotional effect on people who are working with people who are traumatized. So we could say in this circumstance, people who are cocooned with COVID-19, children who are not doing their leaving cert, and the emotional drain on the therapist or the teacher, or is there anything we can do to help with that?
Look, if I'm a teacher, and my pupils are really, really upset about not doing the leaving cert, and they're up. There's always an opportunity. This is a difficult, stressful situation, but this is how we learn and this is how we grow, is how well we rise to this challenge. And so it's all about framing in your mind goals for yourself in this externally difficult situation. And if you frame it in that way, you will actually grow through this and feel good about yourself in terms of how you handled it.
Absolutely. I mean, several people have asked about, and you did deal with it in your slide, about the common physical impacts of stress. And I suppose as a GP, it was something that was very surprising to me when I started off sitting in my chair as a GP, and patients would come in, and it was very unusual that a patient would come in and sit down and say, I'm stressed, doctor. They would, maybe as a feeling that they needed to validate their symptoms, they would always come in and say, I'm worried about my heart because I'm having palpitations, or my tummy there's something wrong with my bowels, I must have a problem with them, my tummy is always at me, or my breathing is not great, or I've got tingling in my fingers or tingling around my mouth. And over time as a GP, you learn to spot these presentations very quickly. And obviously some of these conditions can have physical causes, and sometimes we need to outrule physical illness. But in general, that constellation of symptoms that we see of butterflies in the tummy, palpitations, sweating, dry mouth, that they're very common presentations for us as GPs.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you're so familiar with that in your work.
Yes. So anxiety, because it's a general arousal system preparing for action, there's not an organ in the body that's not affected by it, and there's not a symptom of any disease that cannot be illness that cannot be mimicked by anxiety. And there's been studies done that the majority of people sitting in hospital outpatient waiting rooms for consultations, gastroenterology, neurology, depending on the specialty, sometimes 50, 60, 70% are there primarily because of problems of stress and anxiety, mimicking these just as exactly as you outlined. And so the thing is, once you can name something, once you can understand it, that's my autonomic nervous system activating. That's me getting anxious. Just naming it, slightly detaching yourself from it and realizing you are not your thoughts. Your thoughts, you can watch your thoughts, and you can be a bit like fake news. You can be deliberative about whether or not these thoughts are accurate or not. And once you have that slight detachment, which breathing allows you to do, gives you, because it's a reset, you can actually break into that and start to say, well, okay, this isn't this great terrifying experience I'm having with these terrifying symptoms. This is anxiety. Okay, I know what to do about anxiety. I know I can get some sense of control of it. The greatest antidote to anxiety is feeling in control. The greatest source of anxiety is feeling out of control. And that's why setting goals for yourself, that's why demonstrating yourself you can change your anxiety with your breathing, it works so well.
And I suppose it's very interesting to us as GPs. We find that people adapt to that type of explanation very quickly when they're given it. Initially, they may, it's the whole mind-body dichotomy. I try to explain to people there's no structure ever been found in the neck that says everything above it is psychological and everything below is physical. And people seem to really have an affinity with the idea that if they have a serious physical illness, that might have emotional consequences for them.
Yeah.
People are very familiar with that people with, serious illnesses, their mood might be affected, they might feel anxious. But without explanation, they often find it quite difficult to think that anxiety and depression, that they can have physical symptoms of their own. And really an explanation around that is often very helpful for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And the symptoms, it can be chronic pain, it can be headaches, it can be stomach disturbance, as you said. I mean, there's not there's not a bodily system where you can't have anxiety-related symptoms.
So what about, Cherry has asked us about untraining our brains from negative expectations of the future.
Yeah.
Is that a different pathway, a path of work, or is it similar?
Well, it's part of the same thing. It's all learning. It's all learning. And we know that learning is hard, and we know it's up and down. We know that changing habits is hard. If you smoke, it's very hard to change habits, but you can. The brain is plastic, and you can learn to do it. Unlearning negative frame of mind. So there's a kind of cognitive training where I mentioned that when I'm in some lectures I've given where I'm feeling a bit anxious, your attention, when you're anxious, your attention system looks for evidence of threat. So my eyes focused on the only two, a couple of people who were frowning and not liking what I was saying. And it was like a magnet. I was focusing on them. So that channeling of my attention towards evidence of threat made my anxiety worse and made my performance worse, which made my anxiety worse. So there's a kind of training that's called attention control training, where basically on a computer screen, people are trained not to train their brain away from always being attracted to threat words or threat images, and to actually learn the habit of paying attention to positive things. So, and that takes a few hours of training too. So it's a question of a negative mindset. Pessimists can be trained to become more optimistic. There's no doubt about it. We're not born pessimists. So we can become more confident as well. But it's just gradually training the habits, becoming aware of our own thinking process, becoming aware of the fact that it's what we're attending to that's making our emotions the way they are. And if we change what we attend to, we will change our emotions. Don't always listen to the COVID news, and the radio. Don't ration yourself on that.
And I suppose an interesting question that's come up is, obviously, when you went into that stressful situation with your work colleague, you had time to plan as to how you were going to manage that. Yeah. Are there any simple techniques for managing angry or arousal outbursts?
So I remember many years ago in Edinburgh, in fact, where I was working as a clinical psychologist with people with brain injury. And there was this young man, a man in his 40s, who had a brain injury, but he was living at home with his wife. And he was doing really well, except for one thing. He'd have these every so often, and not terribly often, maybe only once a month or less often, would have a terrible temper outburst. Not physical, just a temper outburst. And this was actually, she found it very difficult to cope with this, and actually their marriage was under threat. So I engaged in training him to try and recognize in advance when the early symptoms of the anger coming up, and then to use breathing to reduce it, so to kind of short circuit it. It didn't work, and so the marriage was nearly finished, and he was in a bad way, depressed and everything. And then one day he came in and he said, I cracked it. And I said, why? What did you do? Which aspect of my therapy did work? He said, no. I started counting to 10. And that's all he'd done. He'd learned himself just that ancient technique. Someone says something hurtful, you have this impulse to say something, say, no, count to 10.
But it wasn't just the counting to 10. By counting to 10, he probably also gave himself time to do what you did with your colleague, which was actually make a plan of how he was going to act.
Absolutely. And he emptied, by that distraction, he emptied his working memory system of all these angry thoughts and hurt thoughts and kind of all these impulses. It was a kind of reset. So that's we can all learn. No one is inherently always bad-tempered or inherently depressed. There's always stuff we can do if we can be bothered putting into action the slow, painful steps necessary to learn to change these habits.
I think
And
we've
Ian,
got
I
just
might just
one
finish
more
up by
question.
just asking you a question myself in terms of, as a society, could you have imagined that we would have had to face the challenges that we have had to face in the last couple of months? And how do you think as a society we have coped with that?
I think as a society we've done amazingly. I mean, I'm just so proud of people, how they've adapted, how they've knuckled down, how they're coping. I'm proud of us, and living in Ireland here, I'm proud of our government. I think we've done really well and shown that we can rise to challenges. So yeah, I'm thrilled by it, and I know it's tough for a lot of people. Yeah.
Okay. So I'd just like to thank you so much, Ian, for the presentation. We really enjoyed it. I'm sorry that we couldn't get to all the questions. There were just so many questions. We tried to include as many as we could, and I hope that everybody enjoyed the webinar.
Yeah, it was great talking to you, David. Thanks very much for.
So I'm going to hand you to Susanna now in the alumni office.
Yes.
And she will tie
Thank you both so much. There was, I loved all the tips, and you can just see from all the comments that were coming through that what you were both speaking to really has resonated with so many people. I'm just looking at the number of attendees that we have had listening in today. There have been over 400 of you listening. So clearly this is a topic that resonates. Thanks to all of you who have been listening in. Ian and David, thanks for your time today. There's really a lot to take away. And also to the team behind the scenes, especially Siobhan and Colin this week, thanks so much for making this webinar happen. If you'd like more information on the work that Ian is doing, you can go to his website, ianrobertson.org. You can follow him on Twitter at IHRobertson. And also, if you would like to find his book, it's called The Stress Test, How Pressure Can Make You Stronger and Sharper. Looks like that's at Amazon, Book Depository, and a number of other locations. And also, I just wanted to bring attention to the Healthy Trinity website. There's a wealth of information there, not just on mental health, but really a whole wide range of topics. So it'd be great for you to check out that site. It's tcd.ie/collegehealth/promotion. And if you are available for next week, we'd love to have you at the Inspiring Ideas at Trinity webinar. It's also at 1 p.m. on Wednesday. We will be talking on Trinity COVID-19 Immunology Project with Kingston Mills, Aideen Long, and Luke O'Neill of Trinity, and it will be facilitated by Professor Veronica Campbell. If you have any questions about this webinar, any others that we've done, or any questions for Trinity Development and Alumni, please email us at alumni@tcd.ie. Thanks again to all of you for being here. Thank you, Ian and David, and we hope you stay safe, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so much.